Portmore, St. Catherine, a place that gave Jamaica some of its most beloved music, its most electric dancehall moments, and one of the most controversial figures the island has ever produced. A man who could write a lyric that would make an entire nation move, and in the same breath, allegedly order a man's death over 2 missing guns. Today we trace the life, the crimes, the conviction, and the unlikely freedom of Adidja Azeem Palmer, better known to the world as Vybz Kartel, the Worl Boss, the teacher, a man whose story is so layered, so complicated, and so deeply Jamaican that it is almost impossible to tell it without feeling the weight of every word. Adidja Palmer was born on January 7, 1976, at Victoria Jubilee Hospital in Kingston, Jamaica, into a family of 6 children. He had 4 sisters and 1 younger brother, which meant from early he carried that energy of the older sibling, the one who sets the tone, the one others look to. His mother was Teresa Palmer and his father, Norris Palmer, a man who, by all accounts, was serious about education and was initially not at all interested in his son pursuing a music career. He pushed for Adidja to stay in school, to follow a straight path, to do things the right way, but music had already found Adidja before his father could stop it. 2 of his uncles were aspiring musicians themselves, and from a very young age they exposed him to a wide variety of sounds, from reggae to dancehall to everything in between, planting seeds that would eventually grow into something the entire Caribbean could not ignore. The family settled in Waterford, a community in Portmore, St. Catherine. Waterford was the kind of community that shaped you whether you wanted it to or not. Tough, vibrant, full of character and sound system culture. It was the kind of place where a boy with ears and ambition could either find music or find trouble. And young Adidja found music first. The sound system culture that ran through Portmore, the events, the clashes, the late nights where selectors and DJs battled for crowd control. That world was his classroom long before any formal school ever was. By the time he was around 11 or 12 years old, he had already recorded his first single, a track called Love Fat Woman, released under the name Adi Banton, a clear nod to his admiration for Buju Banton, one of Jamaica's most revered dancehall artists. The single was put out on Alvin Reed's One Heart label, and just like that, a career had begun before most boys his age were even thinking about one. He attended Calabar High School in Kingston, one of Jamaica's most well-known traditional boys' schools, a place with a proud academic and sporting history. His time there was cut short when he was expelled as a teenager, around age 16 by some accounts. But the exposure to literature and structured thinking at Calabar would later be credited by Kartel himself as part of what sharpened his lyrical ability. He could write. He could take an idea and dress it in words the way a tailor fits cloth, tight and precise. He could construct an argument in a verse the way lawyers construct one in court, which was an irony that would not be lost on anyone who followed his story closely in the years to come. Because one day there would be a courtroom, and it would be the most important stage he ever stood on. His first child was born on April 18, 2003. When Adidja was 27 years old, he was already deep in the music by then, already building towards something bigger. He would eventually have multiple children, including sons with his longtime partner, Tanesha Shorty Johnson. Among them, Little Addie, whose real name is Akil Palmer, and Little Vybz, both of whom would eventually follow their father into music. He was also briefly married to Stacey Elliott between 2006 and 2008. Through all of it, he tried to keep his children out of the worst of the public glare, even as everything around him was becoming more and more difficult to control. By the mid-2000s, Adidja Palmer had fully transformed into Vybz Kartel, and the name was becoming impossible to ignore in dancehall. Out of Waterford, he built what became known as the Gaza Empire, also called the Portmore Empire, a music collective tied to his record label, Adidja Him Records. The roster was stacked with names that would go on to carve their own lanes in Caribbean music. Popcan, Tommy Lee Sparta, Black Rhino, Ja Vinci, Gaza Slim, whose real name was Vanessa Sadler. These were the affiliates, the artists who moved under the Gaza banner and helped turn it into a cultural force that stretched far beyond Jamaica's shores. At its peak, Kartel's inner circle reportedly numbered around 30 men, a tight entourage that blurred the lines between music crew and something that law enforcement would later describe in far more serious terms. Authorities characterized it as having gang-like elements tied closely to its leader's orbit, a description Kartel and his supporters consistently rejected. The Gaza Empire's rise coincided with one of the most intense musical rivalries Jamaica had seen in years. On one side was Gaza, Kartel's faction. On the other was the Gully side, aligned with his rival Mavado. What began as a clash of music styles and lyrical warfare, DJs trading diss tracks and crowd energy, eventually spilled off the stage and into the streets. Jamaican youth across the island picked sides, and what had started as entertainment turned into real-world confrontations with real-world consequences. Communities divided. Young men who had never even met Kartel or Mavado were fighting and dying over which banner they claimed. Authorities and media alike raised serious concerns about the effect this rivalry was having, and Kartel's lyrics, which often glorified guns, violence, and what Jamaicans call bad man culture, became a flashpoint in the national conversation about crime and music. He maintained consistently that it was entertainment, that he was playing a character, that dancehall had always spoken the language of the streets and always would. But for the families who buried sons over Gaza versus Gully loyalties, the distinction between art and real life was becoming very, very thin. Behind the music, the legal pressure was already beginning to build. In 2010, police raided Kartel's Gaza studio and seized loaded M16 magazines. It was an early and very clear signal that law enforcement was watching, and watching closely. Operation Kingfish, one of Jamaica's most significant anti-crime initiatives, had him firmly in its sights, with authorities raising pointed questions about gang activity connected to his entourage. Police stated publicly that they had interest in at least 10 members of the entertainment industry linked to shootings and murders during this period. The walls were beginning to close in, but nothing could have prepared the public for what 2011 was about to bring. It started with Barrington Bossy Burton. Burton was a 27-year-old businessman and music promoter from the Gregory Park area of Portmore, a local figure in the entertainment scene who moved in the same circles where music and money and dangerous men sometimes intersected. On Monday, July 11th, 2011, Burton was shot dead while standing with friends along Walker's Avenue in Gregory Park. It was a targeted shooting in broad daylight community life, the kind that sends a message as much as it ends a life. The street, the people standing near, the broad openness of it all. None of that stopped whoever pulled that trigger. Kartel was arrested on September 29, 2011, initially over something far more routine. Police raided his hotel room and found a spliff, a marijuana possession incident, the kind of thing that on its own would have been a footnote. But once he was in custody, investigators did not stop there. They went through his seized phone. They combed through intelligence they had been quietly gathering for months. And on October 3rd, 2011, just days after his arrest, Kartel was formally charged with the murder of Barrington Burton, along with illegal possession of a firearm connected to the same incident. Police alleged that Kartel, along with other men, had conspired in the killing, with some reports claiming he had ordered or directed the shooting directly. It was the first murder charge filed against him in 2011, but it would not be the last, not even close. When the Burton case finally went to trial in the Home Circuit Court, the prosecution made a decisive move. On July 24, 2013, they offered no further evidence against Kartel and his co-accused. The judge directed the jury to return a not guilty verdict, and Kartel was acquitted on that charge. But he did not walk out of that courtroom a free man, because sitting beside that case, overshadowing it completely, was a second murder charge, one that had been added shortly after the first, one that involved a missing body, a burned house, a terrified woman's text messages, and a line of words recovered from a phone that would be read aloud in a Jamaican courtroom and reported around the world. The story of Clive "Lizard" Williams begins with something as ordinary as trust. Williams was a dancer and associate within Kartel's inner circle, part of that Gaza entourage, one of the foot soldiers who moved in the orbit of the Worl Boss. He was not a recording artist, not a big name in the industry. He was a man who was close to a very powerful man, and that proximity, it would turn out, would cost him everything. Williams and another associate, Lamar Wee Chow, had been entrusted with 2 illegal firearms belonging to Kartel for safekeeping. When those guns went missing and were not returned when they were supposed to be, the call came. Both men were summoned to Kartel's residence in Havendale, St. Andrew, an upscale area in Kingston, far removed from the streets of Portmore, on August 16, 2011. They went there to explain themselves, to beg if they had to, hoping words would be enough. What happened inside that house is something that Chow, who became the star witness for the prosecution, described in chilling detail during the trial. According to Chow, both men pleaded for their lives in the living room. At some point, Kahira Jones allegedly grabbed Williams. Chow briefly left the room, and when he returned, Williams was motionless on the floor. Andre Mad Sus St. John, Kartel's barber, was standing nearby holding a building block. Chow said he fled the scene as fast as he could. Clive Williams was never seen alive again. His body was never found. Not then, not ever. Williams' girlfriend, Onyeka Jackson, testified in court that on that very same day, she had received panic text messages from him. In those messages, he begged her to call the police and a person named Nadine. He said he was afraid. He knew something was terribly wrong. Those text messages were among the last communications anyone ever received from Clive "Lizard" Williams. Days after the incident, the Havendale house allegedly burned down. When police had first visited the property after the incident, they found nothing immediately alarming and left. When they returned on August 27, 2011, 11 days later, the entire interior of the house had been completely destroyed by fire. No report of any fire had ever been made to the authorities. None. Forensic investigators went back on August 29th and noted a foul odor coming specifically from the living room area, the very spot where the beating was alleged to have taken place. On a later visit on September 30th, the rear of the house had also been demolished. Piece by piece, the scene was disappearing. The prosecution's case against Kartel and his co-accused, Sean Storm Campbell, Kahira Jones, and Andre St. John, was largely built on circumstantial evidence. There was no body. There was no undisputed forensic confirmation of a murder. But what the prosecution had were the text messages, and among them, a message recovered from a phone, an SD card, linked to Kartel, that became the absolute centerpiece of the entire trial. The message, translated from Jamaican patois, stated that they had chopped Lizard up very finely and disposed of him in such a way that he could never be found. There were also other recorded voice notes and messages allegedly showing Kartel and his co-accused discussing the missing guns, using the word shoes as coded slang. One recording allegedly captured Kartel telling Sean Storm something to the effect that he was not going to get himself killed over the situation. The prosecution also charged Kartel alongside Gaza Slim, Vanessa Sadler, for allegedly fabricating a story that Williams had robbed her, an effort prosecutors said was designed to mislead police into believing Williams was still alive and simply hiding. The defense challenged everything. They attacked the authenticity of the phone evidence aggressively, raised serious questions about the chain of custody, alleged tampering, and pointed to discrepancies in timestamps and metadata on the videos and messages. Kartel and his co-accused maintained from the very first day of the trial to the very last that they were innocent and that the evidence had been fabricated against them precisely because of Kartel's enormous verdict eventually came. On March 13, 2014, after less than 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a 10-1 guilty verdict against Kartel, Campbell, Jones, and St. John. Shane Williams, the fifth accused, was acquitted and freed. On April 3, 2014, all 4 convicted men received life sentences. Kartel's minimum term before he could even be considered for parole was set at 35 years. The man who had built an empire from a rough community in Portmore, who had changed the sound and the language of Caribbean music, who had filled stadiums and broke records, was now looking at decades behind prison walls. But the story did not end in that courtroom. The appeals process moved slowly, the way legal processes always do, but it moved. The Jamaican Court of Appeal upheld the convictions in 2020, rejecting every argument raised about evidence tampering, jury conduct, and the integrity of the phone data. The case then climbed to the UK Privy Council, which at the time remained Jamaica's highest appellate court. And it was there, after all those years, that everything shifted. In March 2024, the Privy Council quashed the convictions unanimously. The reason was not the phone messages. It was not the missing body or the burned house. It was a juror. An alternate juror had allegedly attempted to bribe other members of the jury with 500,000 Jamaican dollars in exchange for an acquittal. The trial judge had been informed of this and had made the decision to allow the juror to remain. The Privy Council ruled that this was fatal to the safety of the convictions and that it had fundamentally denied Kartel and his co-accused their right to a fair trial. The matter was sent back to Jamaica's Court of Appeal to decide whether a retrial should be ordered. In July 2024, the Court of Appeal ruled against it. The reasons were both practical and deeply human. Too much time had passed, more than 13 years. Key witnesses were missing. Kartel's health had deteriorated significantly during his years of incarceration. The interests of justice, the court concluded, no longer pointed toward putting these men through another trial. On or around July 31st, 2024, Vybz Kartel and his 3 co-accused walked out of custody as free men. The reaction in Jamaica and across the diaspora was immediate and electric. For his supporters, it was full vindication, proof that the system had failed from the beginning. For his critics, it was a deeply uncomfortable an unsettling moment. For the family of Clive Lizard Williams, a man whose body was never recovered, whose fate was never officially determined by any court of law, it was something else entirely, something that does not have a clean or satisfying word attached to it. Since his release, Kartel has moved back into public life with the kind of energy that suggests he never truly left it even from behind bars. In 2025, through his Adidja Palmer Foundation, he donated 1 million Jamaican dollars to Waterford Primary School, a gesture that the community received warmly. with residents of Waterford having long referred to him as a living legend. He is 50 years old now, a father, a figure whose sons are already walking the same musical road he built. The Gaza Empire, the crew he constructed from a tough community in Portmore, changed Caribbean music in ways that are still being felt today. Whether history ultimately judges him as a genius, a criminal, or both, one thing has never been in question. The name Vybz Kartel will not fade quietly. It never has, and it never will.